lonely after 70. Do this every single day. It changed my life at 83. Walter Osgood, 83 years old. In January of 2020, I started keeping a notebook to prove I wasn't as isolated as I felt. I wrote down every real conversation I had each day. After 11 days, I looked back through it. I had not had a conversation longer than 4 minutes in nearly 2 weeks. I put the notebook in the kitchen drawer and didn't open it again for 3 months. My neighbor Dennis had been doing something on his front porch every morning for 4 years. I watched him from my kitchen window and told myself it wasn't enough. I told myself that until I was 80 years old and out of better ideas. In January of 2020, I started keeping a notebook. Small things, spiral bound, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore for $1.49. I carried it in my shirt pocket, and every evening I wrote down every real conversation I'd had that day. I started it to prove I wasn't as isolated as I felt. By the end of the first week, I had 4 entries. By the end of the second week, I had 7. Some of them were 2 sentences with the woman at the pharmacy. One of them was a nod to the mail carrier that I'd counted because there was nothing else to count. After 11 days, I looked back through the notebook and saw what I had been trying not to see. I had not had a conversation longer than 4 minutes in nearly 2 weeks. Not a real one. Not one where someone asked how I was and waited for an answer. I put the notebook in the kitchen drawer and didn't open it again for 3 months. That's where this starts. Not with a dramatic moment, with a spiral notebook in a kitchen drawer and an old man who couldn't bring himself to keep looking at what it said. I was a postal worker for 33 years, Route 14 in Akron, Ohio. The same streets, the same houses, most of the same names on the mailboxes for the better part of 2 decades. I knew those streets the way you know a thing you've done with your hands every day, not consciously, just thoroughly. I knew which dogs barked and which ones bit. I knew which porches flooded in spring and which sidewalks were uneven in the dark. And I knew people, not deeply, not the way you know a friend, but in the particular way of someone who shows up at the same door every day for years. People talked to me, told me things, asked about my knee when I came back from the surgery, remembered that my daughter had a baby, that kind of knowing. Thin but real and present every single working day. I retired in 2009. The route went to someone else. The people I'd known on it went on with their lives and I went on with mine. And what I did not understand at the time, what I had no framework to understand, was that the job had been doing something for me that I had not been doing for myself. It had been providing, 5 days a week, the basic human requirement of being seen by other people. And when it ended, I did not replace it with anything because I did not know I needed to. Dorothy was still alive then, my wife, 49 years. She was the person I told things to, the person who registered whether I had had a good day or a hard one, the person whose presence in the house made me exist in relation to someone. When she died in 2014, I lost the job and the person at the same time, not at once, but in sequence. And by the time I understood what I had lost, I had also lost the habit of looking for it. For a while, the grief covered the loneliness so completely, I couldn't see where one ended and the other began. In the first year after Dorothy, I moved through days the way you move through water when you're very tired. Slowly, with effort, toward no particular destination. My children called. They came at Thanksgiving and Christmas. My son flew in from Seattle once just to check on me, and we sat at the kitchen table for 2 days and talked about everything, except the thing that was actually wrong, which was that I did not know how to be a person in the world without her. The loneliness I am talking about is not the grief. Grief I understood. Grief had a shape, had a reason, had a direction. What came after the grief was different, quieter, less legible. It was the Tuesday afternoon with nothing wrong and nothing right. The lunch eaten standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt like staging a scene for an audience that wasn't there. The television kept on in the other room for the sound of voices, not the content. It was days passing without a single moment of genuine contact, and then more days, and the accumulation of them into something that started to feel not like a temporary condition, but like the permanent weather of the rest of my life. I tried things. I want to say that before I say anything else. I am not a man who sat still and waited for something to change. I went to a senior center once in 2016 and walked around the perimeter of the main room for 20 minutes watching people play cards and didn't speak to a single person and drove home and didn't go back. I signed up for a woodworking class at the community college and went twice and stopped because the other students were 30 years younger than me, and I felt not unwelcome, but irrelevant. I tried calling old friends and found that old friends were also old and also diminished, and the conversations were effortful in a way that left me feeling more tired than connected. What I did not try, what I dismissed without trying, was the small daily things I watched my neighbor Dennis do 3 houses down. Dennis Kowalczyk lost his wife 4 years before me. He and I had been neighbors for 22 years, the kind of neighbors who waved from driveways and occasionally borrowed tools and never quite become friends, because that is how men of our generation handle proximity, with politeness and appropriate distance. After his wife died, Dennis started doing something I noticed from my kitchen window and did not understand. Every morning around 8 o'clock, he put a folding chair on his front porch and sat in it, not always for long, sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. He sat there with his coffee, and he was visible to the street, and the street, slowly, over weeks, started talking to him. People walking dogs stopped. Neighbors heading to their cars paused. He started knowing people's names on our block that I couldn't have told you after 22 years. Then he started going to a Thursday morning card group at the community center. Then he took a part-time job at the hardware store on Maple, not for the money, as far as I could tell, since he had a pension that was fine, for the hours, for the reason to be somewhere that wasn't his house. I watched all of this from a distance and thought, that won't fix anything. That's not enough for what's actually wrong. I thought that for 4 years. In February of 2020, on a Tuesday, I ate lunch alone at the kitchen table, a sandwich I'd made myself, turkey, the same thing I made most days because it required no decisions. The television was on in the other room, some news program, the sound of voices that weren't talking to me. I finished the sandwich in 8 minutes. I know it was 8 minutes because I was watching the clock, which is what I had started doing without meaning to, measuring the day by what was left of it, calculating the distance to evening, to sleep, to another day exactly like this one. And I had a thought that arrived not as a crisis but as a fact, the particular clarity of something you've been avoiding finally sitting down across from you and refusing to leave. This is not a bad day. This is every day. And every day is going to be like this until it isn't anymore. And I am the only one who can change it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up and went to the garage and found a folding chair that had been in there since Dorothy died, and I had meant to throw out and never did. I carried it to the front porch, and I set it up facing the street, and I sat down in it with a cup of coffee. It was February in Akron. It was 34 degrees. I sat there for 22 minutes. One person walked by with a dog. I said good morning. She said good morning back and kept walking. I went inside. That was it. That was the beginning of the thing that changed everything. The fact is simple. I put a chair on the porch every morning. Every morning, regardless of weather, I carried it out and I sat in it. Some mornings for 10 minutes, some mornings for an hour. If it was raining, I put on a jacket and sat under the overhang. If it was cold, I brought a second cup of coffee. The chair was out there at 8 o'clock every morning, the way a flag is out. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but as an announcement. I am here. I am available. This is where I am. The interior was harder. I felt, for the first several weeks, profoundly foolish. I am a man who spent 33 years as a civil servant, who raised 3 children, who coached Little League for 5 seasons, who built a deck off the back of this house with his own hands in 1991. Sitting on my front porch waiting for someone to talk to me felt like the action of a person who had given up, who had shrunk, who was doing a small, sad thing because the large, real things were no longer available. I kept doing it anyway, because the alternative, the kitchen table, the 8-minute sandwich, the clock, was worse. The detail I can't shake, the sound of the street at 8 in the morning in February, quieter than I expected. Occasional car, occasional dog, the distant sound of something mechanical from the direction of the main road, and the specific sensation of cold air on my face while I held a warm cup. Ordinary, grounding, the feeling of being physically present in a specific moment instead of sliding through a day that had no texture. Here is what happened over the following weeks in the order it happened. After 3 days, the man 2 houses east, I had never learned his name in 18 years, walked past and said, "Cold morning." And I said, "Sure is." And he nodded, and we both went about our business. That was the whole exchange. I wrote it in the notebook that evening, and it was the longest entry in 2 weeks. After 10 days, I knew his name was Gary. After 3 weeks, I knew he had a daughter in Columbus and a bad hip, and had worked at Firestone for 26 years before the plant closed. Not because we'd had any single long conversation, because we'd had 30 short ones. I started saying good morning to everyone who passed, not in a performed, cheerful way, just as a fact, the way you acknowledge another person who is occupying the same stretch of mourning. Most people said good morning back. Some stopped for a moment. A few stopped for longer. By April, I knew the names of 11 people on my street that I had not known in February. This is the thing I want you to understand. I was not cured of anything. I was not suddenly not lonely. What I was less alone inside the loneliness, because there were now small daily moments of contact, small, ordinary, completely insufficient on their own, that added up over weeks into something that had a different texture than the nothing I had had before. Dennis had been doing this for years. I called him one evening in March. We had never once talked on the phone in 22 years of being neighbors. And I said, "That chair on your porch, did it help?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's not the chair. The chair is just how you get started." He told me about the card group. Thursday mornings, community center, 7 or 8 people. Game called Pinochle that I had not played since the 1970s, and that I was, according to Dennis, going to be terrible at. He said, "You're going to hate the first 2 times. Go anyway." I went. I was terrible at it. I went back. The cost of all of this, the invisible cost, the one I hadn't anticipated, was the recognition of how much I had lost by not doing it sooner. Every Thursday morning I drove to the community center and sat with men and women my age who had been doing this for years. who had built these small daily structures of contact into their lives after loss and loneliness and the various diminishments of age. And I thought, I dismissed this. For 4 years I watched Dennis do exactly this, and I told myself it wasn't enough. And what I was really telling myself was that I didn't want to need it. Needing it felt like defeat. It was not defeat. It was just the thing that was true. And the sooner I stopped arguing with what was true, the sooner I could do something about it. The last time I saw Dennis before he started at the hardware store, I asked him why he'd taken the job. He said, because on the days I work, I know exactly where I'm going and there will be people there when I get there. He said it plainly, the way he said most things, and I drove home and sat in the driveway for a few minutes, thinking about how many days in the past 6 years I had woken up without knowing where I was going or whether anyone would be there. On a Wednesday in November, 3 months after I started the card group, I drove to the hardware store on Maple, and I bought a package of weather stripping I didn't need, and I talked to Dennis for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and I drove home with the specific feeling of having been a person in the world for a little while. I stopped at the end of my driveway and sat in the car. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The street was quiet. The chair was on the porch where I'd left it. I thought, this is what I should have been doing in 2014, in 2015. In every year I spent telling myself that the small things wouldn't be enough. I want to be honest about what changed and what didn't, because I am not going to tell you a story where everything got better. I am still 83 years old. Dorothy is still gone. My children are still in 3 different states and call on Sundays. The house is still too big for one person and always will be. The particular loneliness of a man who spent 49 years sleeping beside the same woman and now sleeps alone, that doesn't go away. I am not going to tell you it goes away. What changed is the texture of the days. I now have, on most days, at least one moment of genuine contact with another person, not always meaningful by any large measure. Sometimes it is 3 minutes on the porch with Gary talking about whether the forecast is right. Sometimes it is Thursday morning pinochle, which I am still not very good at, and which I now look forward to in a way that slightly embarrasses me to admit. Sometimes it is the hardware store, where Dennis and I have developed the kind of friendship that men our age develop, practical, undemonstrative, reliable. 2 or 3 people on my street would notice by noon if something had happened to me. That is not a small thing. For 6 years, I am not sure that was true at all. Here is what I know now that I did not know at 74 or 77 or 80. The loneliness that comes with age is not solved by large things. It is not solved by moving closer to your children, which may or may not be possible, and which solves a different problem than the one I'm describing. It is not solved by waiting for something significant to come along, a new friendship, a new purpose, a new reason. Those things come, when they come, from the small daily actions that create the conditions for them. You do not find connection by looking for connection. You find it by being somewhere, regularly, in a way that makes you findable. The chair on the porch is not a metaphor. It is a chair. It is a specific physical act of being present in a place where other people can encounter you. The card group is not profound. It is 7 people in a room on Thursday mornings playing a card game that most of them have been playing for decades. The 20 minutes at the hardware store is not a deep friendship. It is 20 minutes with a man I have known for 26 years and never actually talked to until 3 years ago. None of it is enough on its own. All of it together is the difference between a life I was surviving and a life I am living. I know you, not you specifically, but the version of you that might be listening to this. You are somewhere past 60 or 70, and the world has gotten small in ways you didn't fully anticipate. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've retired and discovered that retirement, what you thought you wanted, removed the last structure that was keeping you connected to the daily world. Maybe your children are good and attentive and genuinely love you, and you still feel, on the Tuesday afternoons, a specific and wordless absence that their phone calls don't quite reach. You have probably told yourself that the small things won't be enough, that sitting on a porch is not the answer, that a card game with strangers is not what you're looking for. I told myself that for 4 years. The small things are not the answer to everything. They are the answer to the Tuesday afternoon, to the 8-minute sandwich, to the clock, to the day that has no contact in it and slides into evening and then sleep and then another day exactly like it. They are what you do not because they fix the fundamental thing, but because the fundamental thing cannot be fixed. And the choice is between doing the small things and not doing them. And not doing them is much worse. Tomorrow morning. Not next week. Not when the weather is better. Not when you feel more like it. Tomorrow morning. Do one small thing. Put a chair somewhere visible and sit in it. Walk to the end of the street and back and say good morning to whoever you pass. Find out when the closest community center has something happening and go once, even if you think it's not for you, even if you're sure you won't like it. Call the neighbor you've been meaning to call for 2 years and have not called. One thing. Tomorrow. Not because it will fix everything, because it is the first step of a practice, and the practice, over weeks and months, is the difference between the life I had in 2019 and the life I have now. Tell me in the comments, what's the one small thing you could do tomorrow that you've been telling yourself isn't enough? Because I spent 4 years asking that question and getting the wrong answer. I'd like to hear yours.